I stared at the charred fabric in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was supposed to be the happiest morning of my life, but instead, I was holding the burned remains of my wedding dress in a gift box from my parents. The cruel note tucked inside made my blood run cold. "Let's see how you get married." My mother Linda and father Robert had left for Hawaii without a word of explanation, abandoning me on my wedding day, like I meant nothing to them. The white silk that had taken months to save for was now blackened ash and tattered pieces destroyed beyond any hope of repair. Standing there in my childhood bedroom, clutching what should have been my dream gown, I realized my own parents had deliberately sabotaged the most important day of my life. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 in the morning, and I rushed downstairs, still clutching the destroyed dress tears streaming down my cheeks. Through the frosted glass, I could see an elegant silhouette that somehow radiated calm authority, even in shadow. When I opened the door, Eleanor Whitmore stood on my front porch with the kind of composed grace that comes from handling crises with practiced ease. "Carol, darling," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "David called me about the situation with your dress." Her eyes immediately went to the charred fabric in my arms, and her expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. I suspected something like this might happen, so I took the liberty of preparing alternatives. Before I could process what she meant, 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Women in crisp blazers emerged carrying garment bags, makeup cases, and equipment I could not identify. Eleanor guided me to the living room as her team transformed my family's modest home into what looked like a high-end bridal salon. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't understand," I stammered, watching seamstresses set up portable sewing stations in our dining room. "How did you know something would happen?" Eleanor's smile was knowing but not unkind. "Carol, I have been observing family dynamics for more years than I care to count. Your parents' behavior at the engagement dinner raised several red flags for me." She gestured to a woman unpacking what appeared to be professional lighting equipment. "I called our family boutique this morning and had them send over several options in your size." The casual way she mentioned our family boutique made me pause. David had always been vague about his family's work, mentioning they were in retail without going into specifics. But the level of coordination happening in my living room suggested resources far beyond anything I had imagined. A stunning blonde woman approached us carrying 3 garment bags. "Mrs. Whitmore, I brought the Vera Wang, the custom Marchesa, and the vintage-inspired Monique L'Huillier as backup options. The alterations team is standing by." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Amanda. Carol, these are some pieces from our current collection. Nothing too elaborate, just a few things we had available on short notice." My jaw dropped as Amanda unzipped the first bag to reveal a gown that belonged in the pages of Vogue magazine. The intricate beadwork alone probably cost more than my annual salary. "Mrs. Whitmore, I cannot possibly afford anything like this." "Nonsense!" she waved dismissively. "Today is about celebrating your marriage to my son, not worrying about finances." She picked up her phone and began making calls with the efficiency of someone accustomed to moving mountains. "Marcus, it's Eleanor. I need you at the Riverside Country Club in 2 hours with your full setup. Yes, I know it's short notice. Transfer the Hamptons event to next weekend if necessary." I listened in amazement as she coordinated with vendors I had only dreamed of working with. Each call revealed another layer of influence and resources that made my head spin. The woman helping me into the first dress whispered that it was an original design worth more than most people's cars. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said when she finished her calls, "I think there has been some misunderstanding about what kind of wedding this is supposed to be." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with something that might have been amusement. "Oh, darling, I think the misunderstanding has been entirely on your parents' part. They clearly do not understand who they are dealing with." The Vera Wang gown fit like it had been created specifically for my body, which I learned was not entirely coincidental. While the seamstresses made final adjustments, Eleanor casually mentioned that they had been monitoring my measurements since the engagement, anticipating the need for backup plans. The level of foresight was both impressive and slightly overwhelming. Carol, there are some things about David's family that he has been hesitant to share. Eleanor began settling into my mother's favorite armchair with the kind of natural elegance that made our middle-class furniture look shabby. He wanted you to love him for who he is, not what he comes from, which I respect. But given today's circumstances, I think it's time for complete transparency. She opened her phone and showed me a website that made my breath catch. Whitmore Heritage Jewelers was not just a boutique, but a luxury empire spanning the entire East Coast. Store locations in Manhattan, Boston, Charleston, and Miami showcased collections that celebrities wore to red carpet events. The company profile described fourth-generation family ownership with an estimated value in the hundreds of millions. David's great-grandfather started with a single shop in Boston. Eleanor explained, scrolling through images of stunning jewelry displays. We now have 23 locations and serve clients including European royalty and Hollywood A-listers. She paused on a photo of a necklace I recognized from a recent awards show. That piece sold for $2.8 million last month. The numbers were so far beyond my comprehension that I had to sit down. David worked as a project manager for a construction company, living modestly in a 2-bedroom apartment. Nothing about his lifestyle had suggested this kind of family wealth. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, feeling suddenly self-conscious about every aspect of my background. Eleanor's expression softened. Because he has seen too many relationships destroyed by fortune hunters and social climbers. He wanted to be certain you loved David, the person, not David, the heir to a jewelry empire. She gestured around our simple living room. Your family's genuine warmth and your obvious devotion to my son convinced him he'd found something real. A knock at the front door interrupted our conversation. Eleanor checked her phone and smiled. That will be Harrison with the contracts. David's father entered carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car. Behind him came 2 men in expensive suits who immediately began setting up what looked like a mobile office in our kitchen. Harrison kissed my cheek with the same genuine warmth he had always shown, but now I understood the quiet authority that surrounded him. Carol, I am sorry your parents chose to handle things this way, he said, opening his briefcase to reveal neatly organized legal documents. But I want you to know that their behavior reflects nothing about you or your worth to our family. One of the suited men approached Harrison with a tablet displaying what appeared to be financial reports. Sir, we have reviewed the venue contracts and vendor agreements. Everything can be transferred to the estate within 3 hours if you approve the expenditure. Harrison glanced at the screen and nodded. Authorize whatever is necessary. Today is about celebrating our new daughter, not counting costs. He turned back to me with a gentle smile. Carol, I hope you do not mind, but we would like to move your wedding to our private estate. The security will be better, and we can ensure no further disruptions from family members who might not have your best interests at heart. The casual reference to security made me realize how seriously they were taking my parents' sabotage attempt. Eleanor showed me photos of their estate on her phone, and I gasped at images that looked like something from a European castle. Manicured gardens, a chapel with stained glass windows, and reception spaces that could accommodate hundreds of guests. This is too much, I protested weakly, though part of me was thrilled at the prospect of a wedding beyond my wildest dreams. My parents just wanted to hurt me. They did not mean for things to escalate like this. Harrison's expression grew serious. Carol, we have been quietly monitoring your family's behavior for several months. What happened this morning was not a spontaneous act of spite, but part of a calculated campaign to undermine your relationship with David. He pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. Our private investigator has documented numerous attempts by your parents to research our family's finances and assets. I stared at the folder, afraid to open it but needing to understand what had been happening behind my back. Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder as Harrison continued. We believe your parents have been planning to ask us for money either as a wedding gift or as some form of payment for accepting you into our family. When their research revealed the extent of our holdings, their expectations apparently grew beyond reasonable bounds. The weight of this revelation hit me like a physical blow. My parents had not just sabotaged my wedding dress, but had been scheming to profit from my relationship for months. The betrayal felt deeper than anything I could have imagined. Eleanor's voice was firm when she spoke. "Darling, your parents clearly expected you to be devastated and weddingless today, probably hoping you would come running to them for comfort. Instead, they are about to discover that their little prank has very serious consequences." By noon, the Whitmore estate had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Marcus Rodriguez, who I learned was the most sought-after wedding planner on the East Coast, had worked what could only be described as magic in 4 hours. String quartets practiced near a flower-covered altar, while servers in crisp uniforms arranged champagne stations throughout the gardens. The guest list had mysteriously expanded from our original 75 people to nearly 200. David explained that word had somehow spread through his family's social circle, and people were genuinely excited to meet the woman who had captured his heart, despite having no idea about his background. Several faces looked familiar from magazine covers and society pages. "Carol, you look absolutely radiant," David said when he saw me in the Vera Wang gown. His eyes were bright with happiness despite the morning's chaos. "I am sorry my parents had to reveal everything this way. I wanted to tell you about the family business gradually." I squeezed his hand, feeling overwhelmed by the generosity surrounding us. "I understand why you waited. This morning has been surreal enough without processing all of this earlier." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a photo from my parents' Hawaiian vacation. They were lounging on beach chairs with tropical drinks, clearly expecting me to be devastated by now. The timestamp showed they had sent the image just minutes before my ceremony was scheduled to begin. A surge of anger mixed with determination rose in my chest. They had planned this moment carefully, probably imagining me crying and humiliated while they enjoyed their vacation. Instead, I was about to marry the man I loved in a setting more beautiful than anything I had ever imagined. "David, would you mind if I posted some photos on social media today?" I asked, an idea forming in my mind. He looked puzzled but nodded. "Of course. Why?" I showed him the beach photo from my parents, and his expression darkened. "They sent this during our ceremony. They wanted me to see how much fun they were having while I dealt with the mess they created," I explained. "But I think it is time they understood exactly what kind of family they tried to mess with." Eleanor appeared beside us carrying a professional camera. "Carol, I took the liberty of hiring a photographer to document today's events. Premium package, of course." She handed me the camera with a knowing smile. "I thought you might want some high-quality images to share with family and friends." The ceremony itself exceeded every dream I had harbored about my wedding day. David's voice was steady and loving as he promised to protect me from anyone who tried to hurt me, a vow that felt especially meaningful given the morning's events. When we kissed, as husband and wife, the applause from 200 guests created a sound like thunder across the estate grounds. During the cocktail hour, I began posting photos on Instagram and Facebook, carefully tagging my parents in each image. The first post showed David and me cutting our elaborate 3-tier cake, surrounded by ice sculptures and floral arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The caption read, "Thank you to my amazing in-laws for making our dream wedding possible when others tried to destroy it." The second post featured our wedding party, which now included several recognizable socialites and business leaders who had spontaneously joined the celebration. I made sure to include location tags showing the Whitmore estate and vendor credits that would be immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with luxury events. By the time we sat down for dinner, my phone was already buzzing with congratulations from friends who were stunned by the transformation from this morning's crisis to an evening that looked like it belonged in Town and Country magazine. Each notification felt like a small victory against my parents' attempt to ruin my happiness. Eleanor caught my eye from across the table and raised her champagne glass in a subtle salute. She understood exactly what I was doing, and her approval gave me the confidence to continue documenting every magnificent detail of the day they had tried to destroy. The notifications on my phone became a constant stream of pings and buzzes as our wedding photos gained traction across social media platforms. What had started as a personal desire to show my parents their sabotage had failed was quickly becoming something much larger and more public than I had anticipated. My Instagram post featuring the ruined wedding dress alongside images of my actual ceremony had been shared over 3,000 times within 2 hours. Friends, acquaintances, and complete strangers were commenting with support and outrage at my parents' behavior. The contrast between the charred fabric and the stunning Vera Wang gown told a story that needed no explanation. "This is incredible," whispered my college friend Janet, scrolling through the comments during dinner. "People are tagging news outlets and wedding magazines. Your story is spreading everywhere." Eleanor, who had been monitoring the social media response on her own phone, leaned over with evident satisfaction. "Carol, I think you should see this." She showed me a screenshot of a Twitter thread by a popular lifestyle blogger with over 1 million followers. The thread detailed my wedding story as an example of family toxicity and the importance of chosen family over biological relatives. The wedding planner Marcus approached our table carrying his tablet with barely contained excitement. "Mrs. Whitmore, the photographs from today's event are being shared by several major wedding industry accounts. 3 different magazines have already reached out asking for exclusive interviews." David squeezed my hand under the table. "Are you comfortable with this level of attention?" he asked quietly. "We can ask everyone to stop sharing if you want privacy." I considered his question while watching another flood of supportive comments appear on my posts. People were sharing their own stories of family betrayal and praising my resilience in turning a horrible situation into something beautiful. The overwhelming support from strangers felt like validation that what my parents had done was truly wrong, not just a harmless family disagreement. "No," I said firmly. "I want people to see what happened. Maybe it will help someone else who is dealing with family members who try to destroy their happiness." Eleanor smiled approvingly and began typing on her phone with rapid efficiency. "In that case, I think we should be more strategic about this. I know several journalists who specialize in family dynamics and social issues. If this story is going to spread anyway, we might as well ensure it is told accurately." Within an hour, Eleanor had connected me with a reporter from a major newspaper who specialized in family psychology. The woman was fascinated by the story of wedding sabotage and the dramatic rescue by in-laws who turned out to be unexpectedly wealthy and generous. She explained that my experience represented broader societal issues around family manipulation and the importance of establishing healthy boundaries with toxic relatives. My phone suddenly exploded with a rapid succession of incoming calls that made the screen light up like a Christmas tree. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach drop. My parents were calling frantically from Hawaii, having clearly discovered that their harmless prank had become a viral sensation with their names attached to the story. The first call came from my mother's number, then my father's, then my mother again. The calls continued in rapid succession, each one going to voicemail as I sat frozen at our reception table. Eleanor watched the incoming calls with the expression of someone observing a particularly interesting scientific experiment. 97, 98, 99 calls. David counted, checking the call log on my phone. "I think they are starting to understand the situation." Eleanor's smile was razor sharp as she raised her champagne glass. "I suspect Linda and Robert are having a very different kind of evening than they had planned when they sent that beach photo." The calls from Hawaii continued throughout our reception, but I let every single one go to voicemail while dancing with my new husband under fairy lights that transformed the estate gardens into something magical. By midnight, my phone showed 147 missed calls from various combinations of my parents' numbers, plus frantic text messages that grew increasingly desperate as the hours passed. The first voicemail from my mother was dismissive. "Carol, you are being ridiculous. It was just a joke. Call us back immediately." But as the night progressed and our wedding photos continued spreading across the internet, her tone shifted dramatically. The final message, left at 2 in the morning, Hawaii time, was barely coherent through her tears. "Please, honey, you have to take down those posts. People are saying terrible things about us. This has gone too far." David and I spent our wedding night in the guest suite at the Whitmore Estate, a space larger and more luxurious than my entire childhood home. When we woke up the next morning, Eleanor was waiting in the breakfast room with a stack of newspapers and her laptop open to multiple browser tabs. "Good morning, newlyweds," she said cheerfully, pouring coffee from an elegant silver service. "I thought you might want to see how your story is being covered." The local newspaper had picked up the story with the headline, "Wedding Sabotage Backfires Spectacularly for Local Couple." A lifestyle website featured our photos in an article titled, "When In-Laws Save the Day, a Modern Fairy Tale." Most shocking was a piece in a national magazine that used our story to discuss the rising trend of adult children cutting contact with toxic parents. My phone rang again, and this time I recognized the number of our family landline back home. "They must have gotten back from Hawaii," I told David, reluctantly answering the call. "Carol Marie Henderson." My father's voice boomed through the speaker with forced authority. "You get over here right now and explain what you think you are doing." "It's Carol Marie Whitmore now, Dad," I replied calmly, "and I am having breakfast with my husband and in-laws." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. When my father spoke again, his voice was smaller, uncertain, in a way I had never heard before. "We are at your apartment. We need to talk to you. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." Eleanor gestured for me to put the phone on speaker, then mouthed "recording app" while pointing to her phone. I nodded and activated the speaker function, understanding that documenting this conversation might be important later. "Carol, sweetheart." My mother's voice was artificially sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "We brought you some lovely gifts from Hawaii, expensive things. Can you come home so we can all sit down and work this out like a family?" David squeezed my hand supportively as I responded. "Mom, you burned my wedding dress and left a cruel note telling me I could not get married. Then you went on vacation expecting me to be devastated. What exactly do you want to work out?" "It was just a silly prank," my father interrupted, though his voice lacked conviction. "We never meant for it to turn into this circus. You have embarrassed our entire family by posting those things online." Eleanor held up her laptop screen showing a Facebook page where my parents' friends and neighbors were discussing the wedding sabotage story. Comments ranged from shocked disappointment to outright condemnation of their behavior. My mother's book club had apparently held an emergency meeting to discuss whether she should be asked to step down as president. "What we want," my mother said, her voice taking on a pleading quality, "is for you to delete all those posts and tell people there was a misunderstanding. We can say the dress was damaged accidentally and everything worked out fine in the end." I looked at Eleanor, who shook her head firmly while pointing to headlines about family abuse and toxic relationships. Our story was already being used by therapists and counselors as an example in their work. Deleting everything now would not undo the impact, and it would also prevent other people from feeling validated in their own family struggles. "I am not deleting anything," I said firmly. "What you did was not a misunderstanding or an accident. You deliberately tried to ruin my wedding day." "Fine." My father's voice turned harsh again. "We will see you at 5 o'clock at your apartment. We are going to settle this face to face, and you are going to fix the mess you created." The line went dead, and Eleanor immediately stopped her recording app with obvious satisfaction. "Well," she said, saving the audio file to multiple locations, "that was quite illuminating. They still believe they are the victims in this situation." David shook his head in disbelief. "They want her to lie about what happened to protect their reputation." "More than that," Eleanor observed, "they want her to take responsibility for their actions having consequences. That recording will be very useful if we need to demonstrate their complete lack of accountability." Harrison entered the breakfast room carrying his own laptop and wearing the expression of someone who had been working since dawn. "I have been reviewing the background investigation on Linda and Robert," he announced, setting down his computer. "There are some additional facts about their motivation that Carol should understand before any confrontation this afternoon." Harrison opened his laptop to reveal a comprehensive dossier that made my stomach clench with anxiety. Financial records, property documents, and even screenshots of internet searches painted a picture of my parents' lives that I had never fully understood. "Your parents are in significant debt." Harrison began gently, clearly aware that this information would be painful for me to hear. "Their mortgage is 3 months behind. Your father's construction business is failing due to poor decisions and cost overruns on several projects, and your mother has accumulated substantial credit card debt that they have been hiding from each other." Eleanor poured herself more coffee with practiced calm. "The timeline of their financial problems coincides exactly with David's proposal to you 8 months ago. Within 2 weeks of your engagement announcement, your father hired a private investigator to research our family's assets and business holdings." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. They hired someone to investigate David's family, a rather expensive investigation given their financial situation. Harrison confirmed scrolling through bank records that showed payments to a detective agency. They spent over $8,000 they could not afford trying to determine exactly how much money they might be able to access through your marriage. David's face was grim as he processed this information. So the wedding sabotage was not about disapproving of me personally. It was about manipulating us into a situation where they could negotiate some kind of financial settlement. Eleanor nodded approvingly at his analysis. "Exactly right. They expected Carol to be devastated and desperate this morning, probably hoping she would beg them to fix things. Then they could position themselves as the generous parents who saved the day, expecting gratitude in the form of substantial monetary compensation." Harrison pulled up another document showing detailed notes from the private investigator's report. "They know about our jewelry stores, our real estate holdings, our investment portfolio, and our charitable foundation. The notes include specific calculations about what percentage of our wealth they felt entitled to access as Carol's parents." I stared at the numbers in horror. My parents had not just researched David's family, but had actually calculated how much money they expected to receive. The amounts listed were larger than anything I could comprehend, clearly based on assumptions about wealthy families sharing their fortunes with in-laws. "There is more," Eleanor said quietly, opening another file. "Your Aunt Margaret and cousin Jessica were involved in the planning. Phone records show numerous calls between them over the past several months, and Jessica actually visited jewelry stores in Manhattan to research current market prices for high-end pieces. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. My extended family had been coordinating a scheme to profit from my relationship while pretending to support my happiness. Every family dinner, every conversation about wedding plans, every expression of joy about my engagement had been tainted by their hidden agenda. They never cared about my happiness at all." I whispered, feeling naive for not recognizing the signs earlier. David pulled me closer, his voice gentle but firm. "That is not true. Their greed does not diminish the real love and joy that other people felt about our relationship. Do not let their behavior make you question the genuine support we received from friends and extended family." Eleanor's expression softened with maternal concern. "Carol Harrison and I would like to offer our support if you decide to pursue legal action against your parents. What they have done constitutes several potential crimes, including destruction of property, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and possibly attempted extortion." "We've already spoken with our attorney," Harrison added. "Patricia Wells specializes in family law and has extensive experience with cases involving financial manipulation between family members. She believes we have a very strong case if you want to proceed." The weight of decision-making felt overwhelming. Part of me still hoped this was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be resolved with honest conversation. But the evidence of months of scheming and calculation made it clear that my parents' behavior was not impulsive, but carefully planned. What would legal action actually accomplish? I asked, needing to understand the practical implications. Harrison exchanged glances with Eleanor before responding. It would establish clear legal boundaries and consequences for their behavior. More importantly, it would create a public record that might protect other families from similar schemes. Your parents appear to view wealthy families as opportunities for profit rather than people deserving of respect. Eleanor leaned forward with intense focus. Carol, there is something else you should know before you meet with them this afternoon. Yesterday morning before your wedding, your parents attempted to contact us directly. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? They called our main business number trying to reach Harrison or myself. When our assistant explained that we were unavailable due to family commitments, they left a message requesting a meeting to discuss financial arrangements related to the upcoming marriage union between our children. The clinical language of their message made clear that they viewed my wedding as a business transaction rather than a celebration of love. They had planned to approach David's parents directly, probably expecting to negotiate some kind of payment for allowing me to marry into their family. David's jaw was tight with controlled anger. They actually tried to sell you. That appears to be an accurate assessment, Harrison confirmed grimly. The message also included a suggestion that such arrangements were customary among families of significant means, and that they were flexible regarding terms and timing. I felt sick imagining my parents practicing that phone call, probably researching what they thought were appropriate amounts to request. The complete commodification of my relationship and their willingness to treat me like property was more painful than anything they had done to my wedding dress. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Whatever you decide about legal action, Harrison and I want you to know that you have our complete support. You are our daughter now, and we protect our family. Patricia Wells arrived at the Whitmore estate carrying a briefcase that suggested serious legal business was about to unfold. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s who radiated the kind of competence that comes from handling complicated family disputes for decades. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, and her questions precise in a way that made me understand why the Whitmores had recommended her. I have reviewed the preliminary evidence Harrison provided. She began spreading documents across the dining room table with methodical efficiency. What your parents have done represents multiple potential violations of state and federal law, but I want to understand your goals before we discuss specific legal strategies. She opened her laptop to reveal what appeared to be a comprehensive timeline of my parents' activities over the past 8 months. Phone records, financial transactions, and even social media posts had been analyzed to create a clear picture of their planning process. The private investigator your parents hired was more thorough than they probably realized, Patricia explained, pointing to detailed reports on her screen. Sarah Thompson is actually quite reputable, and she maintains excellent records. When I contacted her yesterday about this case, she was horrified to learn how her research was being used. Sarah Thompson turned out to be a former police detective who specialized in background investigations for employment and legal purposes. She had assumed my parents were concerned about their daughter marrying someone with a questionable background, not planning to exploit his family's wealth. Ms. Thompson has agreed to provide testimony about the scope and nature of the investigation your parents commissioned, Patricia continued. They specifically requested detailed financial information about the Whitmore family assets' business valuations and what she describes as vulnerability assessments for potential manipulation. Eleanor leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of vulnerability assessments? Patricia consulted her notes. They wanted to know about any family conflicts, legal problems, or reputation concerns that might make the Whitmores susceptible to extortion or blackmail. They also asked for psychological profiles based on public behavior and business decisions. The calculated nature of my parents' planning was becoming clearer and more disturbing with each revelation. They had not just researched David's family wealth, but had actually looked for ways to manipulate or pressure them into providing money. There is more. Patricia said, opening another file. Phone records show extensive coordination with your Aunt Margaret and cousin Jessica as you suspected, but they also contacted several other relatives and family friends to gather information about your relationship and David's family. She pulled up a list of names that made my heart sink. My grandmother, Evelyn, my cousin Mark, even my high school friend Katie had apparently been questioned about my boyfriend's family background and financial situation. The web of deception extended far beyond my immediate parents. Most disturbing, Patricia continued, are the text messages between your mother and Jessica discussing specific amounts of money they expected to receive. They calculated percentages based on the estimated value of the Whitmore estate and made plans for how to invest their wedding windfall. David shook his head in disgust. They were counting money that was never theirs to begin with. Actually, Patricia said, it gets worse. Jessica apparently visited several high-end jewelry stores in Manhattan, claiming to be engaged to someone from a wealthy family. She gathered information about custom engagement rings and wedding gifts that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, then reported back to your parents about what they should expect to receive. Eleanor's expression was ice cold. They were shopping with our money before they even met us. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering in its audacity and detailed planning. My parents had not just sabotaged my wedding dress in a moment of spite, but had spent months calculating how to profit from my relationship while maintaining the pretense of loving family support. I need to understand something, I said, feeling overwhelmed by the evidence of betrayal. How did they think this would actually work? Even if they had succeeded in ruining my wedding, how did they imagine that would lead to getting money from David's family? Patricia smiled grimly. According to their text messages, they expected you to be so devastated that you would beg them to help fix the situation. They planned to swoop in as the generous parents who could save the day, probably by offering to pay for a replacement wedding or dress. Then, Harrison continued the explanation. They would position themselves as having made a significant financial sacrifice for your happiness, creating an obligation for us to reimburse them substantially beyond their actual costs. Eleanor nodded with understanding. Classic manipulation technique. Create a crisis, provide a solution, then demand compensation for their generosity. The psychological manipulation was as calculating as the financial planning. My parents had been willing to deliberately cause me pain and humiliation as part of their scheme to extract money from my in-laws. The realization that they viewed my emotional well-being as acceptable collateral damage in their financial planning was perhaps the most painful revelation of all. Patricia closed her files and looked at me with professional sympathy. Carol, I want you to understand that what your parents did goes far beyond normal family dysfunction. This level of planning and manipulation represents a serious pattern of behavior that will likely continue unless there are legal consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked, still struggling to process the idea of my own parents facing criminal charges. Several possibilities, Patricia replied. Civil charges for intentional infliction of emotional distress, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Potentially criminal charges if we can prove attempted extortion, which the recorded phone calls from this morning might support. She paused to let the gravity of the situation sink in before continuing. But first, I think we should see what happens at your meeting with them this afternoon. Sometimes people reveal additional incriminating information when they think they are in control of the situation. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, our wedding story had exploded across social media platforms in ways none of us had anticipated. What started as my personal documentation of family betrayal had become a viral sensation that tapped into broader cultural conversations about toxic family dynamics and financial manipulation. A producer from a major morning television show called Eleanor, directly having tracked down the Whitmore family through business connections. She wanted to feature our story as part of a segment on family abuse and the importance of chosen family over biological relatives. 3 different podcasts focused on relationship psychology had reached out for interviews, and a documentary filmmaker specializing in family trauma was interested in following our legal case. "This is incredible," said Amanda Chen, the social media specialist Eleanor had hired to help manage the growing attention. "Your Instagram post about the burned wedding dress has been shared over 50,000 times. The hashtag #SaveTheWedding is trending on Twitter with people sharing their own stories of family sabotage." Eleanor scrolled through hundreds of comments from strangers who were offering support and sharing similar experiences with manipulative relatives. Many people thanked me for being brave enough to expose the reality of family toxicity, saying my story had helped them recognize patterns in their own lives. "Look at this," David said, showing me a Twitter thread by a family therapist with a large following. She was using our story as a teaching example of how financial desperation can corrupt family relationships and emphasizing the importance of setting boundaries with people who view relatives as financial resources. The response was not entirely positive, of course. Some commenters criticized me for airing family business publicly and suggested that private family matters should be resolved privately. But they were vastly outnumbered by people who understood that my parents' behavior went far beyond normal family disagreements. Marcus Rodriguez, our wedding planner, appeared in the sitting room carrying his phone with obvious excitement. "Carol, I hope you do not mind, but I have been getting calls all day from magazines and websites wanting to feature your wedding photos. Vogue is interested in a story about luxury weddings that overcome family adversity." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Marcus, I appreciate the publicity opportunities, but we need to be strategic about media exposure while legal proceedings are pending." "Of course," he agreed quickly, "but the interest level is unprecedented. I have never seen a wedding story generate this kind of emotional response from the public." Patricia Wells called to update us on developments from her office. "Carol, I have been monitoring social media coverage of your story, and I think you should know that several other families have contacted my office about similar situations. Your willingness to speak publicly about financial manipulation within families appears to be encouraging other victims to seek help." The idea that our painful situation might help other people gave me a sense of purpose that made the media attention feel worthwhile rather than invasive. If my parents' cruelty could be transformed into something that protected other families from similar schemes, then perhaps some good could come from this nightmare. Could. My phone rang with my parents' number just as we were preparing to leave for our afternoon confrontation. I glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragement, then answered, while Patricia activated her recording equipment. "Carol, you need to stop this right now." My mother's voice was shrill with panic. "People are calling us terrible names online. Your father's business is getting negative reviews from people who do not even know us. This has to end today." "What has to end is your expectation that I will protect you from the consequences of your actions," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "We are your parents," my father shouted in the background. "You owe us respect and loyalty, not this public humiliation." Eleanor held up her phone, showing a screenshot of a 1-star review someone had left for my father's construction company. "Would never trust someone who would sabotage their own daughter's wedding. Shows terrible judgment and character." "Mom, Dad, you made a choice to hurt me in a very public way," I said. "You posted photos of yourselves enjoying vacation while I dealt with the crisis you created. You made this a public matter, not me." "That was different," my mother protested. "We were just having fun on our trip. We never meant for anyone else to get involved." Patricia made notes while shaking her head at the continued lack of accountability in their responses. Even facing serious consequences, my parents still framed themselves as victims of misunderstanding rather than perpetrators of calculated cruelty. "We will see you at 5 o'clock, my father said, his tone attempting to regain authority. "And you better come alone. We do not want those rich people filling your head with more ideas about suing us or whatever nonsense they have been telling you." The call ended, and Patricia looked up from her notes with professional interest. They are clearly aware that legal action is a possibility, which suggests they understand the seriousness of what they have done, but they are still trying to control the narrative by framing the Whitmores as outside manipulators. Eleanor stood and smoothed her dress with characteristic composure. Well, then I think it is time we paid Linda and Robert a visit and corrected their misconceptions about who exactly they are dealing with. Eleanor insisted that we arrive at my parents' house in the Whitmore family's black Mercedes rather than David's modest Honda, a strategic choice that immediately communicated the shift in power dynamics. Patricia Wells rode with us carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and recording equipment that would document whatever confessions my parents might make during our confrontation. My childhood home looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered, especially compared to the Whitmore estate where I had spent the past 2 days. The lawn-needed mowing paint was peeling from the front porch railings, and my father's work truck in the driveway showed rust spots that spoke to deferred maintenance and financial stress. Remember, Patricia advised as we walked to the front door, let them talk as much as possible. People often reveal more than they intend when they are trying to justify their behavior. My parents were waiting in the living room with an elaborate display of Hawaiian gifts spread across the coffee table. Expensive-looking jewelry designer clothing with tags still attached, and tropical decorations that probably cost more than they could afford given their debt situation. The gesture felt desperate rather than generous, especially knowing about their financial problems. Carol's sweetheart. My mother rushed to embrace me with theatrical warmth. We brought you so many beautiful things from our trip. We wanted to show you how much we love you. My father stood more stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with the presence of Eleanor and Patricia. I thought we agreed you were coming alone, he said, his voice carrying forced authority that no longer seemed intimidating. Dad, these are my family members now, I replied, gesturing to Eleanor and Patricia. They have a right to be here since your actions affected them too. Eleanor stepped forward with the kind of gracious smile that managed to be both polite and threatening. Robert, Linda, I am Eleanor Whitmore. I believe we need to have a serious conversation about your recent behavior. My parents exchanged glances that confirmed they had not expected direct confrontation from David's family. They had probably assumed wealthy people would handle conflicts through lawyers and intermediaries rather than personal meetings. Look, Mrs. Whitmore. My mother began with false cheer. There has been a big misunderstanding. The wedding dress thing was just a silly joke that got out of hand. We never meant any real harm. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out printed copies of phone records and financial documents. Linda, I am Patricia Wells, the Whitmore family attorney. I think you should see some evidence we have gathered about your activities over the past 8 months. The color drained from my father's face as Patricia spread documents across their dining room table. Bank statements showing payments to the private investigator, printed text messages discussing expected financial gains, and detailed notes about the Whitmore family assets created an undeniable record of their scheming. You hired a private detective to investigate my family's finances. Eleanor observed her tone remaining conversational despite the serious accusations. You spent over $8,000 you could not afford to research how much money you might be able to extract from our relationship with Carol. My mother's theatrical friendliness evaporated as she realized the extent of evidence against them. That was just basic research. Any responsible parent would want to know about their daughter's future in-laws. Responsible parents research criminal backgrounds and character references, Patricia corrected. They do not hire investigators to assess vulnerability to financial manipulation or calculate percentages of inherited wealth they expect to access. My father's face was flushed with anger and embarrassment as he recognized specific details from his conversations with the private investigator. You people have no right to spy on us. We are Carol's family, and we were protecting her interests. Eleanor's laugh was genuinely amused. Robert, you burned her wedding dress and left a note telling her she could not get married. In what possible universe does that constitute protecting her interests? The confrontation that followed was both painful and liberating. My parents continued insisting that their behavior was justified, while Patricia systematically presented evidence of their calculated planning and financial motivation. They seemed genuinely shocked that their scheme had been discovered and documented so thoroughly. The wedding dress was just supposed to make her realize she needed our help, my mother finally admitted when pressed about their true intentions. We thought she would come to us crying and we could fix everything and show those rich people how much we cared about our daughter. Patricia made careful notes as my mother inadvertently confirmed the manipulation strategy we had suspected. And what kind of compensation did you expect for this generous rescue? My father's silence stretched uncomfortably long before he answered. We just thought, if they had all that money anyway, maybe they could help us out with some of our financial problems, as a wedding gift or something. Eleanor's expression remained perfectly composed as she delivered the final blow. Robert, Linda, I want you to understand something very clearly. What you have done constitutes multiple crimes under state and federal law. We have documented evidence of conspiracy, attempted extortion, destruction of property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She paused to let that information sink in before continuing. More importantly, you have irrevocably damaged your relationship with your daughter through behavior that demonstrates you view her as a financial asset rather than a person deserving of love and respect. The meeting ended with Patricia serving them official legal papers while my parents sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that their harmless prank had serious legal and personal consequences that would not disappear with expensive gifts and theatrical apologies. Within 48 hours of our confrontation, the social consequences of my parents' behavior began cascading through their personal and professional lives in ways they had never anticipated. The viral nature of our wedding story meant that people throughout our hometown had seen detailed accounts of their wedding sabotage scheme, complete with evidence of their financial motivations and calculated planning. My father's construction company, Henderson Building Solutions, had been struggling financially even before the scandal broke. But now his business phone rang constantly with cancellations from existing clients and harsh criticism from potential customers who had seen the social media coverage. A major commercial project he had been counting on to stabilize his finances was terminated when the property developer cited concerns about his judgment and professional ethics. Carol, you have to do something. My cousin Jessica called me in tears on Wednesday morning. Uncle Robert's business is falling apart and people are saying horrible things about our whole family online. I listened to Jessica's distress with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. Jessica, you were part of the scheme to research David's family and calculate how much money you expected to receive. Did you think there would be no consequences for that kind of behavior? She was quiet for a long moment before responding. I guess I never thought about how it would look to other people. It seemed like normal family business at the time. The psychological dynamics that had enabled my parents' manipulation were becoming clearer as extended family members began reaching out with their own versions of what had happened. Most of them had been told partial truths or outright lies about the situation, but some had suspected that something was wrong with my parents' intense interest in David's family background. My mother's social standing in the community collapsed even more dramatically than my father's business reputation. The Riverside Women's Club, where she had served as treasurer for 6 years, asked her to resign after several members expressed concern about trusting someone with their organization's finances who had demonstrated such poor judgment in personal matters. Eleanor forwarded me an email from the club president that was both diplomatic and devastating. While we appreciate Linda's past service to our organization, recent revelations about her conduct toward family members have raised questions about her character that make continued leadership inappropriate. The book club my mother had founded and led for over a decade held an emergency meeting to discuss her future involvement. According to my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had always liked my mother, despite their occasional disagreements, the discussion was painful but necessary. Nobody wanted to be cruel. Mrs. Patterson told me when she stopped by my apartment to check on how I was handling everything. But Linda's behavior toward you was so calculated and cold-hearted that people started questioning whether they really knew her at all. The most devastating blow to my parents' community standing came from an unexpected source, my father's own mother, Grandma Evelyn. At 82 years old, she had always been the family matriarch whose opinions carried enormous weight in all family decisions. Her public condemnation of my parents' actions sent shockwaves through our extended family network. Grandma Evelyn's statement to the local newspaper was brief but devastating. I raised my son to treat family with love and respect, not to view his daughter as a source of financial gain. Robert and Linda's behavior toward Carol represents everything I tried to teach him not to be. I am ashamed of their actions and proud of my granddaughter for standing up for herself. The interview appeared in the Riverside Gazette alongside our wedding photos and became one of the most read articles in the newspaper's history. Local residents shared the story extensively on social media, with many people commenting that if Robert's own mother condemned his behavior, it must have been truly awful. My parents' church community also began distancing themselves from the scandal. Pastor Williams called me personally to express his concern and disappointment about their behavior, explaining that several congregation members had approached him about my parents' actions, conflicting with Christian principles of family love and support. I have counseled your parents extensively over financial stress during the past year, Pastor Williams told me, but nothing in our conversations suggested they were capable of such calculated cruelty toward their own child. The social isolation was particularly hard on my mother, who had built much of her identity around community involvement and social relationships. Friends who had supported her through various life challenges now questioned whether they had ever really known her character. The carefully constructed reputation she had spent decades building crumbled within days of the truth coming to light. Even more painful for both my parents was the reaction from neighbors who had witnessed years of family interactions. People began reinterpreting past behaviors through the lens of financial manipulation, remembering occasions when my parents had seemed unusually interested in my relationships or had made comments about my future prospects that now seemed calculating rather than caring. The Hendersons who lived next door had always considered my parents good friends and reliable neighbors. But Mrs. Henderson told several people that she now remembered my mother asking oddly specific questions about David's family background and seeming disappointed when she could not provide detailed financial information. Looking back, Linda was fishing for information about that boy's family money for months. Mrs. Henderson confided to others in the neighborhood. I thought she was just being protective, but now I see she was scheming. By Friday evening, less than a week after my wedding, my parents had become social pariahs in their own community. The financial motivations behind their cruelty had shocked people who thought they knew them well, and the calculating nature of their planning had damaged relationships that had taken years to build. David and I watched this social reckoning unfold with mixed emotions. Neither of us wanted to see people suffering, but we also recognized that meaningful consequences were necessary for behavior that had been so deliberately harmful and manipulative. Harrison Whitmore approached the escalating situation with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to handling complex business crises. Rather than simply defending against my parents' behavior, he chose to use their actions as an opportunity to create positive change that would extend far beyond our personal circumstances. Carol, he explained during a family meeting in his home office, your parents' scheme represents a broader social problem that wealthy families encounter regularly. We've decided to use this situation to raise awareness about financial manipulation and support other families dealing with similar issues. Eleanor opened her laptop to show me a beautifully designed website for something called the Henderson Whitmore Foundation for Family Integrity. The foundation's mission statement focused on providing legal and emotional support for individuals whose family relationships had been damaged by financial manipulation or exploitation. We are naming it after you, Eleanor explained. because your courage in standing up to manipulation has inspired us to help other people in similar situations. The foundation will provide legal aid counseling services and educational resources for families dealing with money-motivated abuse. The scope of their vision was staggering. Harrison had already committed $5 million to establish the foundation, with plans to expand programming based on community needs and success metrics. Legal experts would provide free consultation for families dealing with financial manipulation, while mental health professionals would offer specialized therapy for people recovering from money-motivated family abuse. David was amazed by his parents' response to the crisis. "I have seen them handle business problems before, but never anything this personal and emotional. They are treating mom and dad's behavior as a serious social issue rather than just a private family matter." The Foundation's first initiative involved partnering with family law attorneys across the country to identify common patterns in financial manipulation cases. Patricia Wells had been hired as the primary legal consultant, and she was already working with other lawyers to develop resources for families facing similar situations. "We want to understand how widespread these schemes actually are," Patricia explained during a strategy meeting. "Your parents' behavior was highly organized and sophisticated, which suggests they either developed these tactics independently or learned them from other sources." The research component of the Foundation's work revealed disturbing patterns that none of us had anticipated. Financial manipulation within families was far more common than most people realized, with adult children, elderly relatives, and wealthy in-laws being targeted by family members who viewed relationships as opportunities for profit, rather than sources of love and support. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a family psychology expert hired as the Foundation's research director, presented preliminary findings that were both fascinating and disturbing. Financial manipulation often involves the same psychological tactics used in other forms of abuse, she explained. Creating crises, offering solutions, and then demanding compensation creates cycles of dependency and control that can last for decades. Eleanor had also been working with marketing experts to ensure that our story reached people who might benefit from the Foundation's services. Rather than sensationalizing the drama, their approach focused on education and empowerment for people who might not recognize manipulation in their own families. The most innovative aspect of the Whitmore family's response was their decision to create a documentary series about financial manipulation within families. Professional filmmakers would follow several families dealing with money-motivated abuse, showing both the emotional damage caused by such behavior and the healing process that could occur with appropriate support. "We want people to understand that this is not about money itself, but about respect and human dignity," Harrison explained. "Families should be sources of love and support, not financial opportunity." The documentary project had already attracted attention from streaming services and educational institutions interested in using the content for training purposes. Mental health professionals, legal experts, and social workers expressed enthusiasm about having real-world examples to help their clients understand these complex dynamics. David and I were asked to participate in the documentary as a way of showing how family manipulation could be overcome with appropriate support and legal intervention. The idea of sharing our story on such a public platform was intimidating, but the potential to help other families made it feel worthwhile. "Your parents inadvertently created an opportunity for widespread positive change," Eleanor observed with satisfaction. "Their attempt to profit from your relationship has instead resulted in resources that will protect thousands of other families from similar schemes." The irony was not lost on any of us. My parents' calculated cruelty had backfired so spectacularly that it was now funding programs to prevent other families from experiencing similar manipulation. Their scheme to extract money from the Whitmore family had instead inspired the Whitmores to invest millions of dollars in protecting other people from financial abuse. Most importantly for me personally, the Foundation's work was transforming my painful experience into something meaningful and constructive. Instead of simply being a victim of family manipulation, I was becoming an advocate for other people facing similar challenges. 2 weeks after our wedding, my parents' carefully constructed lives had completely unraveled in ways that were both predictable and shocking. The combination of legal pressure, financial consequences, and social ostracism had pushed them into a state of panic that led to increasingly desperate and self-destructive decisions. My father's construction business was officially bankrupt by Monday morning. The remaining contracts had been canceled, his equipment was being repossessed by creditors, and 2 former employees were threatening to sue for unpaid wages. Robert Henderson Building Solutions, which had employed 15 people and supported our family for over 20 years, ceased to exist in less than 14 days. Linda's response to their financial collapse was to max out their remaining credit cards on a public relations consultant who promised to rehabilitate their image and manage the social media crisis. The consultant, a smooth-talking man named Derek Phillips, convinced them to spend $8,000 they did not have on a campaign that made their situation dramatically worse. Derek's strategy involved my parents giving interviews to local media outlets where they attempted to reframe their behavior as a misunderstanding caused by stress and poor communication. The interviews were disasters that revealed the depths of their narcissism and complete lack of accountability for their actions. In their first television appearance, my mother actually claimed that burning my wedding dress had been artistic expression and that their Hawaii vacation had been necessary for their mental health during a difficult family period. When the interviewer asked about the private investigator and financial planning documents, my father became visibly angry and accused the media of persecuting innocent people. Eleanor and I watched the interviews with a mixture of disbelief and professional interest. "They are making our legal case stronger with every word they speak," Patricia observed. "Juries do not respond well to defendants who refuse to take responsibility for clearly harmful behavior." The most damaging interview occurred when my parents appeared on a local radio talk show hosted by a man known for controversial opinions and inflammatory discussions. They had apparently believed this would be a friendly forum where they could present their side of the story without challenging questions. Instead, the host grilled them mercilessly about their financial motivations and calculated planning. When my mother tried to claim they had never intended to profit from my marriage, the host played audio recordings of their text messages discussing expected monetary gains that had been released during legal discovery proceedings. "So Linda," the radio host said with obvious skepticism, "you are telling my listeners that spending $8,000 to investigate your daughter's boyfriend's family wealth was just normal parental concern." My mother's response was rambling and defensive. "We just wanted to know what kind of family she was marrying into. Any good parent would do the same thing. It is not our fault they turned out to be so wealthy." The interview went viral on social media as an example of complete lack of self-awareness and accountability. Comment sections filled with people expressing amazement at my parents' ability to portray themselves as victims while describing obviously manipulative behavior. More devastating than their public relations disasters was the revelation that came during court proceedings the following week. Patricia had subpoenaed additional financial records as part of building our civil case, and the documents revealed the true extent of my parents' desperation and poor judgment. They had borrowed against their house not once but 3 times in the past 18 months, each time increasing their debt load to cover previous mistakes and fund increasingly risky schemes. The private investigation into David's family had been just one of several expensive attempts to solve their financial problems through manipulation and shortcuts, rather than honest work and responsible planning. Court documents showed that my parents had also attempted to manipulate my grandmother Evelyn into lending them money by claiming I was in an abusive relationship and needed their financial help to escape. When she refused and asked to speak with me directly, they had told her I was too embarrassed to discuss the situation with family members. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court revealed disturbing patterns in both my parents' thinking and behavior. Dr. Rebecca Torres, a forensic psychologist specializing in family manipulation cases, diagnosed them with narcissistic personality traits and a shared delusional belief that other people existed primarily to serve their financial and emotional needs. Robert and Linda Henderson display classic patterns of financial predators who target family relationships, Dr. Torres wrote in her report. They show no genuine empathy for the emotional harm they have caused their daughter and continue to view themselves as victims of circumstances beyond their control. The evaluation also revealed that my parents had been lying to each other about their individual spending and debt accumulation for years. Neither had fully understood their total financial situation until the legal proceedings forced complete disclosure of their assets and liabilities. My father owed over $40,000 in business-related debt that my mother had known nothing about, while she had accumulated $35,000 in credit card debt for luxury purchases and social activities that she had hidden from my father. Their marriage was collapsing under the weight of financial stress and mutual deception. The final blow to their remaining dignity came when Jessica, my cousin who had participated in their scheme, decided to cooperate with our legal case in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Her testimony provided detailed evidence about the planning process and confirmed that my parents had viewed my relationship as a business opportunity rather than a source of happiness for their daughter. Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert talked about Carol's wedding like it was an investment opportunity. Jessica testified during a deposition. They calculated how much money they thought they deserved and made plans for how to spend it before they had even met David's family. By the end of February, less than a month after my wedding, my parents had lost their business, their social standing, their financial security, and most of their family relationships. The scheme that was supposed to solve their problems had instead destroyed everything they had worked to build over the course of their adult lives. Standing in Patricia Wells' law office on a cold Thursday morning in early March, I faced a decision that would define not just my relationship with my parents, but also the kind of person I wanted to be going forward. The evidence against them was overwhelming, the legal case was airtight, and I had every right to pursue maximum punishment for their calculated cruelty and financial manipulation. Patricia had laid out my options with clinical precision. Civil damages could easily reach 6 figures based on emotional distress, property destruction, and the costs associated with their interference in my wedding plans. Criminal charges for attempted extortion and conspiracy were also viable, potentially resulting in jail time and permanent criminal records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. "You hold all the cards at this point," Patricia explained, reviewing the strength of our evidence one final time. "The documentation is comprehensive. Their public statements have been self-incriminating, and their complete lack of accountability makes them unsympathetic defendants." David squeezed my hand supportively as I stared at the legal documents that could destroy my parents' futures as thoroughly as they had tried to destroy my wedding day. Part of me wanted them to experience consequences proportional to the pain they had caused me, but another part recognized that revenge would not heal the deep wounds their betrayal had opened. Eleanor and Harrison had made it clear that they would support whatever decision I made. Their foundation was already helping other families, regardless of how our specific case was resolved, so my choice would not affect their broader mission to combat financial manipulation within families. "I keep thinking about the person I want to be 5 years from now," I told the group assembled in Patricia's conference room. "Do I want to be someone who chose healing or someone who chose punishment?" Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the family psychology expert working with the foundation, had spent several sessions helping me understand the broader implications of different approaches to resolving family conflicts. She emphasized that justice and healing were not mutually exclusive, but required careful balance to achieve meaningful results. Carol. Dr. Martinez said gently, "There is a difference between enabling harmful behavior and choosing restorative rather than purely punitive justice. Your parents need consequences that help them understand the impact of their actions, not just punishment that confirms their victim narrative." I'd been thinking about this distinction for weeks, Traditional legal punishment might satisfy my anger, but it would not address the underlying psychological and relationship dynamics that had enabled my parents' behavior. They would probably emerge from jail or financial penalties feeling more victimized and resentful rather than genuinely understanding why their actions had been wrong. I want to propose something different. I said, surprising myself with the clarity that suddenly emerged from weeks of confusion and conflicting emotions. I want them to face real consequences, but consequences that might actually change their behavior rather than just making them suffer. Patricia leaned forward with professional interest. What kind of alternative consequences did you have in mind? Mandatory family therapy with a specialist in financial manipulation dynamics. I began outlining an idea that had been forming gradually: public acknowledgement of their behavior and genuine apology letters to everyone they affected, participation in the Foundation's documentary project as a cautionary example. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Restorative justice rather than purely punitive justice. But with real teeth, I continued. If they refuse any component or fail to complete the program genuinely, then we proceed with full legal prosecution. They need to understand that this is their one opportunity to make things right. David was amazed by the strength and maturity I was demonstrating in the face of such deep betrayal. Are you sure this is what you want? After everything they put you through, you would be completely justified in pursuing maximum penalties. I thought about his question seriously before responding. They tried to break me down and make me dependent on them through manipulation and cruelty. If I choose revenge over healing, then in some way they succeed in making me smaller and more damaged. I want to be bigger than their worst impulses. Patricia began drafting a settlement proposal that would require my parents to complete extensive family therapy, make public statements acknowledging their manipulation and apologizing for their behavior, and participate in educational programs designed to help other families recognize similar patterns. The therapy component would be supervised by court-appointed specialists with expertise in financial abuse dynamics. My parents would need to demonstrate genuine understanding of how their behavior had affected me, and others not just go through the motions of attending sessions. The public acknowledgement requirement would involve written apologies to everyone affected by their scheme, from wedding vendors who'd been inconvenienced to family members who'd been manipulated or lied to during the planning process. These apologies would need to meet specific standards for accountability and genuine remorse. Most importantly, their participation in the Foundation's documentary would serve as a warning to other families about the devastating consequences of viewing relationships as financial opportunities. They would need to honestly discuss their planning process and acknowledge the psychological damage they had caused. If they complete all requirements genuinely and demonstrate real change in their attitudes and behavior, I concluded, then I am willing to rebuild our relationship slowly and carefully. But if they use this as another manipulation opportunity, then they will face the full legal consequences of their actions. The proposal represented a leap of faith that people could change when faced with appropriate consequences and support. It also reflected my belief that breaking cycles of family dysfunction required someone to choose healing over revenge, even when revenge was justified and readily available. 6 months after my wedding day, the changes in all our lives were so dramatic that the events of that February morning felt like they had happened to different people. The foundation that had emerged from my parents' cruelty was thriving beyond anyone's expectations, while my parents themselves had begun what appeared to be genuine transformation through the restorative justice program they had reluctantly accepted. The Henderson Whitmore Foundation for Family Integrity had helped over 200 families navigate various forms of financial manipulation and abuse. Legal clinics in 5 major cities provided free consultation for people dealing with money-motivated family exploitation, while support groups offered emotional healing for individuals recovering from relationships damaged by greed and manipulation. Dr. Martinez's research had identified patterns of financial abuse that were helping mental health professionals and legal experts develop better intervention strategies. The documentary series featuring real families dealing with these issues had been picked up by a major streaming service and was being used by universities to train social workers and family counselors. Your story has become a catalyst for understanding family dynamics that were previously hidden or ignored, Dr. Martinez told me during one of our monthly check-ins. The Foundation has received calls from people all over the country who recognize their own experiences in your situation. Most surprisingly, several state legislatures were considering bills that would strengthen legal protections against family financial abuse and provide better resources for victims. The publicity around our case had demonstrated that existing laws were inadequate for addressing sophisticated manipulation schemes like my parents had attempted. David and I had testified before a state Senate committee about the need for better legal frameworks to address financial manipulation within families. The experience was intimidating but empowering, giving us a sense that our painful experience was contributing to meaningful social change. My parents' transformation through the court-supervised therapy program had been slow and often difficult to watch. The first few months involved them gradually acknowledging the extent of their manipulation and beginning to understand how their behavior had affected not just me, but our entire extended family network. Dr. Sarah Chen, the specialist overseeing their therapy, reported that initial sessions had been challenging because my parents continued trying to minimize their behavior and blame external circumstances for their choices. Breaking through their defensive narratives required months of patient work and consistent confrontation of their victim mentality. The breakthrough came when Linda finally acknowledged that she had viewed Carol as a financial asset rather than a person with her own rights and feelings. Dr. Chen explained during a family session I attended in May. Once she could say that out loud, real healing became possible. My father's acknowledgement of his behavior took longer but was ultimately more comprehensive. His business failure and social ostracism had forced him to confront the consequences of prioritizing shortcuts and manipulation over honest work and ethical behavior. I spent so many years looking for easy solutions to our problems that I forgot how to solve things through actual effort and integrity. He admitted during one of our supervised meetings, "When I saw David's family's wealth, I saw an opportunity instead of people who deserved respect." The public apology process had been humbling for both my parents, but also therapeutic in unexpected ways. Writing detailed letters to everyone they had affected forced them to fully acknowledge the scope of their manipulation and its impact on multiple relationships. Their participation in the Foundation's documentary had been the most difficult component of their rehabilitation, but also the most meaningful. Telling their story honestly as a cautionary tale required them to examine their motivations and decision-making process in painful detail. "We want other families to learn from our mistakes," my mother said during her final documentary interview. "Financial stress can make you do terrible things to people you love if you do not have better tools for handling problems." The documentary episode featuring my parents had become one of the most watched installments in the series. Comments from viewers indicated that their honest discussion of manipulation tactics had helped other families recognize similar patterns in their own relationships. Most importantly for our family healing, my parents had begun making genuine efforts to rebuild relationships based on respect rather than manipulation. They still struggled with their impulse to offer unsolicited financial advice or make subtle references to the Whitmore family's wealth, but they were learning to catch themselves and redirect conversations toward more appropriate topics. David's relationship with my parents remained cautious, but was gradually improving as they demonstrated consistent, respectful behavior. Eleanor and Harrison maintained polite distance while acknowledging that people could change when they faced appropriate consequences and received proper support. The most important thing, Eleanor observed during a family dinner at the estate, is that Carol chose healing over revenge and created an opportunity for everyone to grow from this experience. By late summer, my parents had completed all requirements of their restorative justice program and were beginning to rebuild their lives on a foundation of honesty and accountability, rather than manipulation and shortcuts. My father had found work with a construction company where his experience was valued, but his past mistakes provided ongoing motivation for ethical behavior. My mother had started volunteering with a nonprofit organization that helped families in financial crisis develop healthy coping strategies rather than resorting to manipulation or exploitation. Her firsthand experience with the consequences of unethical behavior made her effective at helping other people avoid similar mistakes. The restoration of trust in our family relationships was gradual and required constant attention, but it was genuine in ways that our previous interactions had never been. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my parents saw me as a person worthy of respect rather than a source of potential benefit. One year after my wedding day, I stood in the same gardens where David and I had exchanged vows. But this time, I was addressing an audience of supporters, donors, and families who had been helped by the foundation that had emerged from my parents' betrayal. The annual fundraising gala had raised over $2 million for expanding programs that helped families heal from financial manipulation and abuse. The woman speaking at the podium bore little resemblance to the devastated bride who had held her burned wedding dress 12 months earlier. That experience had taught me that betrayal could either destroy you or reveal strength you never knew you possessed, and I had chosen to let it reveal strength. Eleanor and Harrison sat at the head table with David and me, beaming with pride at how their foundation had grown and the impact it was having on families across the country. What had started as a response to personal crisis had evolved into a national movement that was changing how mental health professionals, legal experts, and social services addressed financial abuse within families. 12 months ago, I learned that the people I trusted most in the world had spent 8 months planning to profit from my happiness. I told the audience. They researched my husband's family like a business opportunity and calculated how much money they expected to receive for allowing me to marry someone I loved. The audience was quiet as I described the morning of finding my destroyed wedding dress and the cruel note my parents had left. Many people in the room had experienced similar betrayals from family members who had viewed relationships as sources of financial opportunity rather than bonds of love and support. But what my parents did not understand, I continued, was that their attempt to destroy my wedding day would lead to something far more powerful than they had tried to prevent. They gave me the opportunity to discover who I really was when everything I believed about family loyalty was stripped away. Dr. Martinez had been right when she said that crisis could reveal character in ways that normal circumstances never could. Facing deliberate betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had forced me to develop strength and clarity I might never have found otherwise. The Foundation's work had helped over 800 families navigate various forms of financial manipulation during its first year. Legal clinics had provided free representation for people who could never have afforded to challenge family members in court. Support groups had given victims of financial abuse safe spaces to process their experiences and develop healthier relationship patterns. Most importantly, the educational programs had helped thousands of people recognize manipulation tactics before they could cause serious damage to relationships and financial security. Schools, community centers, and religious organizations were using foundation resources to teach young people about healthy family dynamics and financial boundaries. The Scholarship Fund has supported 150 young women and men who were pursuing education despite being cut off from families who tried to control them through financial manipulation. I announced to enthusiastic applause from the audience. These students represent the future we are building, where people can choose relationships based on love and respect rather than fear and dependency. My parents attended the gala as volunteers rather than guests, a distinction that reflected their ongoing journey toward rebuilding trust and demonstrating genuine change. They had requested permission to help with setup and registration because they wanted to contribute to the Foundation's mission rather than simply benefit from the healing process. Seeing Linda and Robert Henderson working quietly to support an organization that existed because of their past manipulation was one of the most powerful symbols of redemption and transformation I had ever witnessed. They understood that earning forgiveness required ongoing demonstration of changed behavior rather than just words and promises. David took the stage to discuss the legal and policy changes that had resulted from our experience. 3 states had passed legislation strengthening protections against family financial abuse, and federal lawmakers were considering similar measures at the national level. Carol's courage in speaking publicly about family manipulation has created legal precedents that will protect other families from similar schemes, David explained to the audience. Sometimes the most personal betrayals can become the foundation for broader social change. During the evening's program, we screened clips from the documentary series that had featured over 20 families dealing with various forms of financial abuse. The honest discussions of manipulation tactics and healing processes had become educational tools used by therapists, legal professionals, and community organizations. The most moving moment of the evening came when Jessica, my cousin who had initially participated in my parents' scheme, spoke about her own transformation through the Foundation's Family Reconciliation Program. Her journey from accomplice to advocate demonstrated that people could change when they faced appropriate consequences and received proper support. I spent months helping my aunt and uncle plan to profit from Carol's marriage because I thought that was normal family behavior, Jessica told the audience. The Foundation's programs taught me the difference between healthy family support and manipulation disguised as love. As the evening drew to a close, I reflected on the lesson that had emerged from the most painful experience of my life. Betrayal from family members felt devastating because it challenged everything we believed about unconditional love and safety. But surviving that betrayal and choosing healing over revenge had revealed strength and purpose I never could have imagined. The foundation that bore my name would continue helping families long after the specific details of my wedding day crisis were forgotten. The legal protections we had helped establish would prevent other people from experiencing the kind of calculated manipulation my parents had attempted. The educational resources we had developed would teach future generations to recognize and resist financial abuse within relationships. If someone had told me a year ago that my parents burning my wedding dress would lead to helping thousands of families heal from financial manipulation, I concluded my speech, I would have thought they were crazy. But sometimes, the people who try to destroy your dreams inadvertently lead you to discover a purpose bigger than anything you had planned. The standing ovation from an audience of people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's work was more meaningful than any wedding reception could have been. My parents' attempt to profit from my happiness had instead inspired David's family to invest millions of dollars in protecting other families from similar exploitation. Most importantly, their betrayal had taught me that choosing healing over revenge restoration, over punishment and hope over bitterness, could transform the worst experience of your life into something that serves a greater purpose. The woman who stood at that podium was stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than the woman who had planned to wear a different wedding dress in a different venue with different expectations about family loyalty. As David and I danced together at the end of the evening, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by programs that emerged from our pain, I understood that my parents had been right about one thing: my wedding day had changed everything, just not in the way they had planned. The greatest gift had not been the designer gown or the fairy tale venue or even the discovery of my husband's family's generosity. The greatest gift had been learning that I was strong enough to transform betrayal into purpose, pain into healing, and personal crisis into social change that would protect other families for generations to come. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone tried to destroy your happiness, but it led you to discover strength you didn't know you had? I'd love to hear your stories of overcoming family challenges in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about turning life's biggest challenges into opportunities for growth. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than whatever they're facing right now. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for the best thing you ever do.